It was getting late. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, leaving nothing but a faint orange light lingering in the sky, growing paler with each passing moment until it vanished completely into darkness. I'd been hiking for what felt like an eternity. The sun would soon set behind this old mountain trail, but I'd underpaced myself to beat the dusk of nightfall. I was not prepared for the terrain to be as challenging as it was. Now, here I was regretting my decision to hike alone. I have always been a keen hiker, one who found solace in the quiet of the woods, the peace that came with being surrounded by nature. But this trail was different. It had a reputation. People whispered about it, about the strange things that happened on this mountain. Locals claimed that it was haunted. Hikers disappeared or returned with dreadful tales, but I always considered such stories as no more than just rumors. All this was merely a mountain trail, after all. As I trekked on, the evening chill began to set in. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and the rustling of leaves was the only sound that accompanied me. The trail was overgrown in places, making it harder to see where I was going. But I pressed on. The summit was only a few miles away, and I was determined to make it there before the darkness fully took over. But the deeper I went into the woods, the stranger things began to feel. The path became narrower, and the trees closed in around me. I could feel the weight of the forest, as if the woods themselves were alive, watching me, waiting. My unease grew, but I shook it off. I was a seasoned hiker. This was nothing I couldn't handle. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound, something I could easily dismiss, a twig snapping, a distant rustle in the underbrush. But as I moved forward, the noises grew louder, closer. It sounded like footsteps. I turned quickly, scanning the trees, but I saw nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was no one else on the trail. I was sure of it. I hadn't passed another hiker all day. Yet the footsteps kept following me, always just behind, always too close. Every time I stopped, the sound would pause. Every time I started walking again, the sound would resume, just a few paces behind me. My heart began to race. I hastened my speed, trying to throw off the sensation of being followed, but the footsteps remained in lockstep with mine. I began jogging, then bolted into a sprint, but there was still the sound following me, keeping pace. I was getting out of breath, and I couldn't slow down because I couldn't let whatever this thing was reach me. I do not know how long I ran, but when I finally came to a stop, gasping for air, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The footsteps had stopped. In fact, the forest had gone completely silent. I stood there, panting with my heart pounding in my chest, trying to get myself together. Something had to be going on. Nothing else explained it. Perhaps it was just an animal, my mind trying to play tricks on me. But I couldn't shake that feeling that something was terribly amiss. I continued walking, my tread uncertain now, my senses keener. The silence felt unnatural, oppressive, like the world around me was holding its breath. Moving along the trail, I began to notice something odd. The trunks of these trees, thick as I'd previously thought them so imposing, now seemed to lean toward the path as if closing in on me. I looked up, and for the first time since I'd entered the woods, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. In the distance, just ahead of me, there was a figure standing in the middle of the trail. I couldn't make out the details at first, just a silhouette against the fading light. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and thin. Its limbs were long and spindly, and its head was cocked at an odd angle, as if it were staring at me from an unnatural position. I froze, my mind racing. Who was that? A hiker? Someone lost? I called out, my voice shaking, but the figure didn't respond. It just stood there, unmoving. I advanced with hesitation. Another step and then another, and it changed its course in an instant and started to go away. I blinked in order to confirm that my eyes weren't playing some kind of trick on me. to convince myself it wasn't some sort of hallucination. But I know what I saw. Without thinking, I started after it, my curiosity getting the better of me. Maybe it was another hiker in need of help, or someone who had taken the wrong path. But as I followed the figure deeper into the woods, I began to notice something even stranger. The trail was changing. What had been a clear, well-worn path was now becoming overgrown and twisted. The trees seemed to be closing in even more, and the air was growing heavier, thicker. It was like the forest itself was trying to keep me from moving forward, as if it didn't want me there. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I looked up just in time to see the figure vanish into the trees. Panic gripped me. Where had it gone? There were no other trails that I could see, no other paths to follow. It had disappeared into thin air. I was just standing there for a moment, petrified, until something caught my eye. A glimpse of movement. It only seemed for a split second, but that's all it took to make my heart lunge up into my throat. The figure was back, but now it was closer. I could see it more clearly, and what I saw twisted my stomach in horror. It wasn't human. Not exactly, at least. Its skin was pale, almost sickly looking, stretched taut over its skeletal frame. Its eyes were too big, wide and black, and its mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin. Its head was tilted too far back, the neck bent at an unnatural angle, and its hands were clawed, long fingers reaching toward me with every step it took. I turned to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't move. It was as if the forest itself was holding me in place. The figure was getting closer, and I could hear its breath, raspy and shallow as it drew nearer. Its eyes never left me. Its smile never wavered. Finally, with every ounce of strength I had left, I broke free from whatever was keeping me there. I ran, my feet pounding the ground, but the figure was still behind me, getting closer with each passing second. I could hear its footsteps now, quick, almost like it was sprinting. I ran and ran, the woods around me a blur of darkness and trees. There was that dampness in the air that filled my nostrils, that scent of decay, damp earth, and the whispers began anew. Low, guttural sounds coming from all sides. I couldn't even be certain if they were real or just head stuff. Finally, after what seemed to be hours, I broke through the trees and pushed my way up into an open area. I collapsed on the ground and gasped for air. My shaking body burned with hot and cold. I looked around, my heart still racing, but there was nothing. No figure, no footsteps, just the stillness of the woods. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe. When I finally mustered the strength to get up, I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest road, where I flagged down a passing car. The driver seemed confused when I climbed into the vehicle, but I didn't care. I was just happy to be out of those woods. I never went back to that trail, and as far as I know, nobody else did. The people here tell stories about the mountain, about the hikers who walks too far and never come back, and those who do come back, but changed. But I don't need to hear the stories. I know the truth. That thing in the woods is real, and it's still out there, waiting for the next hiker who dares to wander too far into its domain. And as for me, I know one thing for sure. I will never step foot in those woods again.